Welcome to the deep dive. So today, forget the surface stuff. We're going after something deeper, something that might really shift how you see things. Glory.
Right.
And I don't mean, the kind of fleeting fame that just disappears. We're talking about a richer understanding, the kind that gives you those real aha moments you told us you're after.
Exactly. And those sources you sent over, really great stuff. They all seem to point towards this really central idea, what God's glory actually means. It's the word we hear all the time, right?
Totally.
But I think we're going to unpack some layers today that might be, well, surprising.
Yeah, that's what's got me really interested. Because digging into this, these two specific words kept jumping out. They seem to unlock something. There's the Hebrew word kabod, which feels, I don't know, weighty, significant, almost like substantial.
Yeah, that's a good word for it.
And then there's the Greek one, doxa, and that seems more about radiance, honor, like a brilliant light. It's almost like putting them together gives you a much fuller picture, maybe more three-dimensional.
That's exactly. And what's really cool is that these aren't just, dusty old terms from a textbook. Understanding kabod as that deep inherent weight, and doxa as that sort of radiant expression, it gives us this amazing lens to see God's glory as, well, both a foundational truth and something really vibrant and real in our lives. This isn't just theology for the sake of it. It's about how this understanding can genuinely change your perspective.
Okay, so let's really get into that profound meaning first then. Your sources talk about God's glory as a radiance beyond the visible. That phrase really stuck with me. It implies it's not just like a pretty light show, as it feels deeper.
Oh, much deeper. Think about that image you mentioned from the source's dawn breaking over this huge horizon. It's not just about the brightness, is it? There's a presence, almost a weight to it that just fills you with awe. God's glory is kind of like that. It's everywhere, this curly substance that's like the bedrock of everything that exists.
So definitely not like a shooting star then. Beautiful for a second and then just gone.
No, not at all. The sources draw that contrast really well. God's glory is enduring. It's this inherent quality of who he is. It's not something he switches on or off. It's woven right into his nature. It's the power that holds everything together, really.
Which I guess leads right into those theological foundations you mentioned. It's not something God earns or puts on for show, right? It's just part of him.
That's absolutely crucial. The sources really stress that God's glory is an immutable attribute. It's not something he built up or achieved. It's just the intrinsic state of the creator. That kabod, that weightiness we talked about, it speaks to that depth. It's a presence that just inherently deserves reverence.
And that really connects with that desire I think we both share, and probably a lot of listeners too, to get beyond just the surface level of things, to really grasp the substance underneath.
Totally. And understanding this profound meaning, it naturally leads us to the practical side of things. I mean, if God's glory is this weighty, enduring, radiant thing, how does that actually change how you live, how you make choices day to day? Your sources point to three pretty significant ways that can really reorient your priorities.
Right. Let's hear them. I'm ready.
Okay, first, purpose and direction. When you really get that God's glory is eternal, it pushes you to anchor your own sense of purpose in values that actually last, to align what you're aiming for with something bigger than just the temporary stuff. It's about seeing your life in the context of that huge eternal picture.
That really does shift things, doesn't it? Like playing the long game, aiming for something that lasts way beyond us. Okay, what's the second one?
Second is worship and relationship. The sources make a great point here. Understanding God's glory shifts worship from maybe just a routine or something you feel you have to do.
Yeah, going through the motions.
Right. Into this dynamic, genuine conversation with a presence that has just immense worth. It's about recognizing that beauty or wonder isn't something we just create ourselves, but it's a gift, a reflection of something incredibly significant.
So not just, showing up on Sunday, but actually connecting with something real, something weighty and radiant. Makes sense. And the third?
Ethical living. When you start to really absorb the profound, unchanging nature of God's glory. It always compels you to act with more integrity, more compassion in your daily life. Your choices start to reflect that divine light that sustains everything. It's about trying to live in a way that matches up with God's own nature, that weight and brilliance together.
One of the sources showed that really powerful story about an artist, the one who had this almost overwhelming experience with light at sunrise.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
It wasn't just like, oh, pretty sunrise. It fundamentally changed their whole purpose, how they even approach their art. It's like that lived reality of God's glory just cut through all the everyday noise.
And what's so powerful about that story is how it makes God's glory feel less like this abstract idea and more like a tangible reality that can completely reshape why we're here and what we're really meant to be doing. Is that call, like your sources said, to get past the superficial and really explore the depths of faith.
Okay, so moving on slightly, this idea of God's glorification.
Yeah.
That seems a bit different from just his inherent glory. How do the sources define what it means for God to be glorified?
Yeah, it's a subtle shift. God's glorification, as the sources explain it, is basically the outward expression of his nature. It's that inherent radiance and honor just naturally flowing from who he is. It's not something added to him. It is him revealing his majesty and sort of inviting us into a deeper encounter.
And this idea has deep roots, scripturally speaking, right?
Oh, absolutely. The sources really emphasize that dynamic interplay we keep coming back to. Kabod, the weight, and Doxa, the radiant expression, as the very foundation anchoring the cosmos, that fundamental reality.
So how does this glorification actually show up? Like, what are the ways we can see it or experience it?
The sources paint a really beautiful picture here, kind of moving from the huge cosmic scale right down to the intimate everyday stuff. So you've got the sheer grandeur of creation itself, a stunning sunrise or sunset, the colors in autumn, the vastness of a starry night. These aren't just nice views. They're like powerful metaphors for God's glory actively at work.
Right, those moments that just kind of take your breath away.
Exactly. But it's not only those big, spectacular things. Your sources also point to human experience, those moments of like deep spiritual awakening or acts of selfless love that seem almost superhuman, or the incredible courage people show when facing really tough times.
Yeah.
These are also reflections, little sparks maybe, of divine glorification happening right in our lives.
It's like tiny glimpses, right? Little sparks of that big cosmic light shining through into our normal reality. And this really connects with that idea you mentioned earlier, wanting different perspectives. Those surprising aha moments, seeing glory in both the massive and the really personal.
Precisely. And understanding these different ways it shows up naturally leads back to, okay, how do you apply this? How do you live in a way that acknowledges this radiance that's all around us?
Right. So taking that understanding God's glorification as this constant expression of his nature, how do we actually translate that into our daily lives, into the choices we make?
Well, your sources suggest a few key pathways. First, by actively, consciously reorienting your priorities. Just like understanding his inherent glory shifts our focus, recognizing his constant glorification as this transcendent reality, helps you move away from chasing those temporary worldly things and focus more on what has real, eternal value.
It's that constant adjustment, isn't it? Always checking in on what truly matters.
Exactly. Second, by cultivating authentic worship. And this means getting beyond just habit or ritual. It becomes this heartfelt response, a real dynamic interaction with the divine presence, whether you're like in a big church service or just sitting quietly by yourself.
Genuine connection, yeah. Not just checking off a spiritual box.
Absolutely. And third, by really trying to embody compassion and integrity in everything you do, when that radiance of God's glory starts to light up your own life, it naturally inspires you to live ethically. Things like kindness, justice, truth, they become tangible ways you express that inner light, a living proof of the divine presence working in you.
There was another compelling story in the sources here about a community that found this incredible renewed purpose and strength. They did it through shared worship, right when they were facing some really serious hardship. It really drove home how God's glorification isn't some distant idea, but a very present source of strength, something that brings real, tangible transformation.
Yeah, what's so powerful about that story is how it shows that when a group of people collectively embraces this fuller understanding of glory, both who God is inherently and how that's expressed outwardly, their lives individually and together are just profoundly changed. It's not just separate experiences, it's a shared journey of transformation.
Okay, now let's really dig into those foundational words, Kabod and Doxa. Your sources talk about biblical glory covering this weight of inherent worth, the radiance of divine presence, and the truth of supreme value. Let's break that down. What exactly does weight of inherent worth mean?
Okay, think back to that analogy in your sources, the huge ancient tree.
Yeah, the one with deep roots.
Right. Standing there through centuries of storms and sun, that weight isn't just its physical size, it's the embodiment of its intrinsic value, its resilience, its very reason for being there. Kabod, in this sense, isn't something added on. It is the substance of God's being. It carries the profound weight of eternal worth.
So it's about inherent dignity, something timeless, unchanging, not based on what someone achieves or what others think.
Exactly right. It really challenges us to rethink how we measure value, doesn't it?
Right.
To look past temporary success or praise and recognize that deeper, inherent divine worth. Okay, so then there's the radiance of divine presence. What does that look like?
The sources use that dawn image again, which I really like. That first light breaking through the darkness, waking everything up, filling it with hope. It's not just pretty, it's like a transformative energy.
Precisely. That radiant presence, the Doxa, isn't just for show. It actively infuses everything with life and hope. You see it in nature's beauty, sure, but also in those unexpected moments of kindness or those times of deep spiritual connection. It's a constant reminder that every little bit of light, every spark of goodness echoes something much, much bigger.
Like a beacon and a guide, I think the sources called it. And finally, this truth of supreme value. What's that about?
This is basically the foundational statement that all of creation, and that includes you, has supreme value simply because God created it. It just completely bypasses any superficial judgment or temporary standard the world might try to impose. It's about recognizing that every single person, every single moment, reflects God's deep love and majesty.
So it's a call to look beyond the surface, right? To invest in what's eternal, knowing our own worth isn't tied up in those fleeting external things.
Exactly. And getting a handle on these three connected ideas, the weight of inherent worth, Kabod, the radiance of divine presence, Doxa, and the truth of supreme value. This isn't just like a mental exercise. It has very real, very practical implications for how you actually live your life.
Okay, so how do we practically apply this weight, this radiance, this worthiness of God's glory in the, the day-to-day stuff?
Right. First, by consciously reevaluating your priorities. When you truly grasp that your deepest value is anchored in that divine worth, your focus just naturally starts to shift, away from the constant chase for material things and more towards nurturing relationships, building community, doing things that have lasting significance.
It's that fundamental shift in what you hold dear, isn't it? What really matters.
Absolutely. Second, by trying to cultivate a radiant presence in your own life. Just like dawn pushes back the darkness, you can intentionally choose to let your inner light shine. Through simple kindness, creative expression, being genuinely authentic, reflecting that higher calling inside you.
Letting that inner light kind of break through. I like that.
And third, by actively affirming the inherent worth of every single person you meet. Recognizing that supreme value in others fundamentally changes how you treat them. It motivates you to act with more compassion, more integrity, more respect.
There was another great community story in the sources here where they found this renewed purpose in healing. They did it by intentionally focusing on practical support, encouraging creativity, and just consistently affirming each other. It's like they deliberately shifted their whole idea of worth away from just external success markers.
Yeah, and what's key in that story is how focusing on those seemingly simple things, practical help, creative outlets, just saying encouraging words, became a tangible way for them to experience and reflect that divine glory together. And it led to real, lasting change.
Okay, let's really zero in on those Hebrew and Greek roots again. Kabod and Doxa. We've touched on Kabod meaning weightiness. What else does that term really capture in the Old Testament?
Well, the sources explain that Kabod, the Old Testament, is actually richer than just weight. It also clearly signifies intrinsic worth, that inherent value we keep talking about, but also power and undeniable authority. It's not just a feeling. It's presented as a tangible reality, a substantial presence.
And it's often illustrated with that image of precious metal, right? Something inherently valuable, substantial, that holds its worth.
Exactly. And even more powerfully, Kabod is used to describe the actual manifestation of God's overwhelming presence. Remember the story of the Israelites at Mount Sinai?
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just lightning and smoke. The text conveys this intense, almost physical sense of divine weight pressing down on them. That's Kabod.
That story of Moses on Sinai is such a powerful image. How does that encounter really demonstrate Kabod so vividly?
The sources highlight it as this truly unforgettable example. When the Kabod, the glory of the Lord, came down on the mountain, It wasn't just about bright lights. It was this overwhelming sense of divine weight, this profound presence. The whole atmosphere felt charged, almost thick with the reality of God's absolute authority and the immense value he placed on his covenant with them.
Wow, a truly transformative moment that left a huge mark. Okay, and then we shift to Doxa in the New Testament, which brings in that element of radiant light.
Yes, Doxa is consistently described as the radiant expression of divine truth, a brilliant light that illuminates all of creation, both what we see and what we don't. So where Kabod kind of grounds us in the profound gravity of God's majestic being, Doxa shines out as this dazzling, transcendent light revealing his character.
So they're almost like two essential sides of the same coin. Kabod gives that deep foundational substance, and Doxa is the outward, brilliant shining of that substance.
That's a great way to put it, precisely. And understanding how they play together is absolutely key to getting the full, rich picture of glory in the Bible.
So how do Kabod and Dox actually come together as like a living reality in our faith? It's not just an interesting footnote, is it?
No, not at all. Your sources really emphasize that their convergence makes God's glory something that is both profoundly tangible, as real as the ground under your feet, and vividly apparent, as bright and undeniable as the sun. It's not some distant abstract idea, but a living, breathing reality that permeates everything.
And this dual nature, this mix of weight and radiance, has some pretty deep implications for how we understand our faith.
Oh, absolutely. Kabod, with that sense of intrinsic value and absolute authority, it constantly reminds us that God's worth isn't based on anything we do. It's inherent. It's unchangeable. It's the foundation everything else rests on.
That's such a grounding thought, really reassuring. And Doxa?
Doxa, with its radiant light, constantly challenges us to see beyond the ordinary, doesn't it? To embrace this vision where every single moment could be touched by the illuminating light of divine possibility. It's that ongoing invitation to look for the extraordinary right within the ordinary, to see those sparks of divine light in everyday life.
So how do we actually live in this interplay of shadow and light? How do we integrate these two powerful perspectives of Kabod and Doxa into our daily lives?
Okay, first, by consciously reframing your own value system. Really internalizing that your deepest worth isn't tied to external stuff or what people think, but it's firmly anchored in God's inherent majesty, that profound Kabod. It's understanding you're deeply valued just because he values you.
That's a massive shift in how we see ourselves, isn't it?
Huge. Second, by actively embracing those transformative encounters in your life, paying attention to those moments of radiant clarity, maybe an unexpected kindness, breathtaking beauty, a moment of deep personal truth, and allowing those experiences, those glimmers of Doxa, to draw you closer to God.
Really noticing those moments when the extraordinary breaks through.
Yeah. And third, by intentionally cultivating presence in your own life. Just like the Israelites felt God's tangible Kabod at Sinai, you can consciously try to create environments in your relationships, your work, even your inner life where authenticity and integrity really matter, allowing that profound substance of Kabod to show up in your actions and interactions.
Creating space for that weight of glory to actually be felt and experienced.
Exactly. And truly understanding these rich roots of Kabod and Doxa, it really does invite you into a much deeper conversation about encountering God's glory. It stops being about just admiring something distant and becomes about actively engaging with a living reality that's both incredibly weighty and radiantly full of hope.
Okay, let's focus a bit more specifically on Doxa now, as it's used in the New Testament. Your sources point out it's more than just outward splendor, right? It includes reputation, honor, the visible shining of an inner reality.
That's a really crucial nuance, yeah. While we often translate it simply as glory, Doxa in the New Testament definitely carries this extra layer of meaning, reputation, the esteem someone is held in, and that outward, visible shining forth of an inner truth. It's definitely more than just a light show.
And that analogy, the source's use of the rising sun, is pretty powerful here, that brilliant, undeniable display proving its energy and presence.
Exactly. Doxa is like that, the powerful, undeniable outward manifestation of God's inner being, that dazzling display of his holiness, his power, his love, made visible in the world.
So it's like the divine signature, maybe, making the intangible parts of God's character feel real, palpable in our experience.
Precisely. It's that undeniable evidence of his power and constant presence. Yeah. Okay, so when we bring Kabod back into this picture, that Old Testament sense of deep weight and inherent worth,
yeah,
how do these two ideas connect here?
Well, the sources explain that Kabod acts as that tangible manifestation of inherent worth and divine majesty, that overwhelming presence we talked about earlier.
Right. So when Kabod, that inherent weight of God's being, and Doxa, that radiant expression and recognition of that being come together, they show us that God's glory is both an intrinsic attribute, something he has just because of who he is, and it's public recognition, that radiant evidence of his worth that shines out into the world.
So true glory isn't something God has to strive for or earn. It's just who he is.
Right.
And that reality itself demands our praise and recognition.
Exactly. And right at the heart of both these powerful words lies this fundamental concept, unassailable worthiness. It's deeply rooted in who God is, his perfect character, his ultimate sovereignty, his unwavering love, not primarily in what he does.
That's a really important distinction to make, I think.
It is. And recognizing this inherent worthiness through the combined lens of both Kabod and Doxa has incredibly significant implications for how you actually approach your own life and faith.
How so? What are some of those key implications?
Well, first, for your personal identity. When you consciously anchor your deepest sense of self and that divine worth that comes from God's own character, that intrinsic Kabod, your identity stops being so dependent on, the fickle opinions of others or fleeting external validation. You start seeing yourself as a cherished reflection of something truly timeless and majestic.
That gives such a solid, unshakable foundation for our sense of self, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Second, it profoundly impacts your worship. It changes it from maybe a routine or an obligation into this truly dynamic, heartfelt response to the undeniable truth of God's radiant glory, the Doxa that defines him. Your praise becomes less about trying to get something and more about just joyfully recognizing and celebrating who he truly is.
It's a genuine reaction to who he is, not an attempt to earn his approval.
Exactly. And third, it deeply informs your ethical living. Embracing this profound understanding of God's worthiness calls you to mirror that same value in how you interact with others, intentionally creating spaces in your relationships and communities where that light of Doxa can shine through real acts of kindness, unwavering justice, and genuine compassion.
Your sources shared the really beautiful image of a community, drawn together by this shared recognition of a truth that went beyond their everyday stuff. In those moments, that sense of Doxa felt almost touchable, and their simple daily interactions became acts of worship.
Yeah, and what's so deeply impactful about that image is how it vividly shows that when we collectively recognize and truly honor God's inherent worth and its radiant expression in the world, it transforms not just our individual lives, but the whole fabric of our communities. It creates this powerful testament to his glory.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit now and look at the really big picture. The panorama of God's glory as it shows up in creation, salvation, and mission. Your sources describe it like this ever-unfolding, breathtaking tapestry.
That's such a great way to put it. God's glory isn't static, is it? It's this dynamic, constantly unfolding story woven through all of reality. And it shows up most vividly in these three huge connected movements. Let's start with creation. How do the sources light up God's glory there?
The sources describe creation as this first grand display where God's glory really originates, even before time as we think of it, like the ultimate original masterpiece.
Exactly. And isn't it just an incredible symphony of order and beauty? From the massive scale of the cosmos right down to the tiniest detail of a cell, the whole universe is this powerful, enduring testament to the divine artist.
And there's that sense, again, of profound weight, of meaning beyond just the visuals, that fundamental foundation of existence itself, reflecting this deep, intentional divine order.
Precisely. It's not just pretty. It's about the underlying substance. Okay, then we move to salvation. How does God's glory show up in that incredible act?
Salvation is described as this radiant unveiling of redemption, where God's glory meets the dynamic, transformative force of his love and mercy. It's where that initial beauty and harmony of creation are ultimately restored and renewed through grace.
Exactly. It's the transformative power of God's grace actively working in the world. And finally, how do your sources talk about mission in the context of God's glory?
Mission is presented as the ongoing, active revelation of God's glory in the world. That continuous call for us to participate in making his glory known through love, justice, and building real community.
Yes, it's the enduring echo of God's own glorious nature, extending out into every corner of the world, often through the hands and feet of those who follow him.
So how do we, as individuals, embrace this whole spectrum of glory in our daily lives? How do we intentionally integrate the truths of creation, salvation, and mission?
Okay, first, By consciously cultivating a deeper awareness in our daily lives, actively noticing that divine artistry in the natural world around us, letting those moments of beauty serve as constant reminders of that profound, eternal significance.
Really paying attention to those everyday wonders we often just walk past.
Exactly. Second, by actively engaging in acts of redemption within our own circles, trying to become agents of positive change, our relationships and our communities, mirroring Christ's selfless love in real practical ways.
Becoming an active part of that ongoing restoration work.
And third, by intentionally joining in the mission, consciously using your unique gifts and talents, however small they might feel to you, to actively manifest God's glory in the world through consistent acts of kindness, justice, and compassionate service.
It's about seeing ourselves as like integral parts of this much bigger eternal story.
Precisely. And when you embrace this rich, multifaceted vision of God's glory, it not only deepens your own understanding, but it also ignites this powerful passion to live out these truths in both your personal life and your community life.
Okay, let's really focus in now on the panorama of creation as a testament to divine glory. Your sources specifically brought up Psalm 19.1, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork." That's such a powerful opening statement.
It really is. And the sources rightly reiterate that God's glory was actively manifest right there in the initial act of creation, even before time as we know it existed. The entire cosmos, in its vastness and its intricate detail, stands as this enduring, powerful declaration of his glory.
And it's not just chaos, is it? It's this incredible, awe-inspiring symphony of order and beauty.
Exactly. Your sources beautifully point to the visual poetry all around us, the sunrise, the mountains, the valleys, as these constant, reliable reminders of a sustaining creative power way beyond ourselves. And then there's that inherent harmony, even in tiny ecosystems, that delicate balance that points so clearly to deliberate, intelligent order.
It's also connected, this web of life and beauty, and then there's that recurring theme. We keep hitting the weight of meaning in it all.
Yes, the concept of Kabod really resonates here again, conveying that sense of profound heaviness, intrinsic substance, that inherent majesty that goes way beyond just superficial appearance. It speaks to the very foundations of existence, inviting us to ponder those deeper questions about where life comes from and how it's designed.
So the psalmist's proclamation isn't just about admiring something pretty. It's a profound invitation to recognize a fundamental, undeniable truth about the universe and who made it.
Precisely. Creation itself serves as this powerful, ongoing testament to both God's infinite power and his immeasurable wisdom, doesn't it? That incredible complexity and harmony act like a divine watermark, underscoring his infinite worth and artistry.
It's like the creator's signature woven right into reality. And it calls us to reflect, right? To really think about our own place within this divinely ordered, purposeful reality.
Absolutely. The natural world around us in every detail invites that ongoing introspection and a deeper recognition of our own place within that grand, intentional design. Okay, so how do we practically live in the light of this understanding, seeing creation as this powerful declaration of God's glory?
Well, your sources suggest actively renewing our perspective, consciously choosing to see encounters with nature not just as nice moments, but as almost meditative opportunities, valuing the world around us for the profound truth it reveals about its maker.
Exactly. And by intentionally cultivating a deep sense of gratitude and responsible stewardship, inspiring within us a greater sense of responsibility to care for this incredible world as the sacred trust that it is.
It really shifts our role from just being inhabitants to being active, responsible caretakers, doesn't it?
And by consciously finding purpose within that inherent order, recognizing that our own daily actions can gain deeper significance as we actively participate in that ongoing revelation of God's glory through how we choose to interact with his magnificent creation.
It's about understanding our lives aren't random, but part of this grand intentional design.
Precisely. And truly embracing this legacy of cosmic wonder calls us to consistently look beyond the surface and deeply appreciate the profound order and inherent beauty that so clearly speak of an ultimate loving creator.
Okay, let's shift our focus now to salvation as this radiant, transformative unveiling of redemption. This feels like a really personal, intimate way God's glory shows up in our lives.
It truly is. The sources describe salvation as this profound, deeply personal demonstration of God's boundless glory, expressed through his infinite love, unwavering mercy, and perfect justice, all embodied in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's the ultimate revelation of who God is.
And that powerful verse from John 1.14 is so key here. "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth.
Yes, in Jesus, God's own inner being was made visible to us, a living, breathing display of divine grace, embodying both perfect truth and boundless mercy. And even the cross, which seems like ultimate suffering, becomes this powerful beacon of transformation through that selfless sacrificial love.
Glory found right in the middle of ultimate sacrifice.
Exactly. And the whole narrative of salvation itself is this remarkable journey from despair and brokenness to incredible hope and renewal, where the depths of human suffering meet the boundless strength of divine grace. It's that journey of sacrifice leading to resurrection, where true glory is found in overcoming even the greatest pain through love's power.
Redemption breaking through even the deepest darkness.
Yes, God's glory powerfully shattering the chains of sin and death, completely restoring and eternally healing what was broken. And understanding salvation this way has incredibly deep implications for your own life, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It fundamentally transforms your personal identity. It lets you see your own worth, not through the warped lens of past mistakes, but through the clear, unwavering lens of divine love and acceptance.
And it calls us to actively cultivate a culture of grace in how we deal with others, striving to embody that same sacrificial love, extending forgiveness just as we've been forgiven.
Living as true agents of renewal in the world, actively extending that powerful hope to people around us and becoming beacons of that transformative light.
Precisely. Truly embracing salvation means actively participating in that ongoing work of redemption in the world, consistently trying to become beacons of that glorious light in a world that often feels pretty dark.
It's about consciously, actively living out that incredible legacy of glorious redemption in our daily lives.
Yes, in every conscious act of forgiveness, every demonstration of heartfelt compassion, that radiant light of salvation shines out, powerfully guiding us toward a future where God's glory will be fully experienced by everyone.
Finally, let's consider mission as that ongoing, active revelation of God's glory in the world. This feels like our chance to actively participate in that big panoramic display we've been talking about.
It really is. The sources describe God's mission as that continuous, vital work of reconciling the whole world back to himself. His glorious nature is actively displayed through tangible acts of love, unwavering justice, and intentionally building vibrant community. It's like the echo of God's own glorious heart reaching out into the world.
And that powerful command, the Great Commission in Matthew 28, is rightly highlighted as that divine invitation for each of us to actively radiate God's glory to the ends of the earth.
Exactly. It basically turns every believer into an ambassador, right?
Right.
Tasked with reflecting his character in their words and actions. And it's not just about isolated individual efforts, it's the beautiful interplay of divine grace and human effort. God's glory dynamically evolving and being revealed through every act of reconciliation and restoration.
So we become co-creators, in a way, in this ongoing divine revelation, actively carrying that light of God's glory forward.
Yes. Through both big gestures and seemingly small acts of kindness and courage, we actively reflect that radiant Doxa, lighting the path for others to encounter God. And through our practical engagement in our communities and beyond, we consciously contribute to God's overall mission through dedicated service and heartfelt compassion.
It's about making that sometimes abstract idea of glory truly tangible and real in other people's everyday lives.
Precisely. And the church itself, ideally, is presented as this living, breathing testament to the enduring power and multifaceted beauty of God's glory through its incredible diversity and its profound unity.
Community and genuine transformation happening within the church as a collective shared experience of God's glory made real.
Exactly. And by intentionally empowering future generations through discipleship and meaningful mentorship, we actively equip them to continue that vital mission, that ongoing essential revelation of God's glory to a world that desperately needs it.
So how do we practically live out this incredible mission in the nitty-gritty of our own everyday lives? What does that look like on a Monday morning?
Well, it starts with fundamentally redefining how we view success. Consciously choosing to measure it not just by personal gain or worldly status, but by how authentically we reflect God's own character and how actively we contribute to the well-being of those around us.
A real fundamental shift in what we truly value. That keeps coming up.
And by intentionally cultivating a consistent attitude of selfless service, actively looking for those daily opportunities, big and small, to tangibly embody God's unwavering love and perfect justice in the world.
Making those seemingly small acts of kindness and service really matter.
Absolutely. And by wholeheartedly embracing the incredible diversity of human experience, consciously recognizing that the unity we find within our different cultures and perspectives beautifully mirrors the multifaceted beauty of God's own magnificent creation.
It's about consciously seeing ourselves as vital parts of this enduring journey with a truly lasting global impact.
Precisely. The mission is that ongoing revelation, where every single life touched and transformed by God's love becomes a powerful, resonant echo of that divine call to glory.
Okay, now let's tackle a more nuanced, maybe less obvious distinction. The difference between intrinsic glory and received glory. What exactly sets these two apart?
Yeah, this is a really insightful and important distinction the sources make. Intrinsic glory is the glory that belongs to God inherently.
Yeah.
Just by virtue of who he is, it's eternal, unchangeable, completely independent of whether humans acknowledge it or not. It's all those foundational perfections we've talked about. His absolute holiness, perfect justice, boundless love, infinite power, immeasurable wisdom, unwavering truth.
So it's like his own inherent brilliance. It exists completely separate from whether we even notice it or praise it.
Precisely. It's the very bedrock of faith, assuring us of God's perfect, unchanging worth, regardless of what we do or understand. Okay, then there's received glory. What's that about?
That would be the honor, the praise, the adoration that God rightly receives from his creation, right? Mostly through things like worship and faithful living.
Exactly. It's our conscious, intentional recognition and celebration of that intrinsic worth that already exists within him. Now, our praise doesn't actually add anything to God's inherent glory,
Right.
but it does affirm and beautifully reflect the reality of who he already is.
Like admiring a stunning piece of art, our appreciation doesn't make the art better, but it acknowledges and celebrates its inherent beauty and the artist's skill.
That's a perfect analogy, really helpful. And when believers come together in worship, they're essentially joining voices to echo that fundamental truth of God's supreme inherent worth.
It's like an invitation for us to actively partner with God in revealing his majesty and splendor more fully in the world.
Yes, our acts of worship, our obedience, our faithful living, they become living testimonies that point right back to his intrinsic glory. So how do these two concepts, intrinsic and received glory, relate to each other?
The sources describe them as being beautifully complementary, almost like a light and its reflection. The intrinsic glory is the pure, original light source. And the received glory, our worship, our praise, is the reflection that maybe magnifies its beauty for others, but doesn't change the light itself.
Exactly. And consciously recognizing this dynamic challenges us to approach worship with more authenticity, truly acknowledging that inherent perfection that already resides within God. So how does understanding this distinction practically impact our own lives and our communities?
Well, it helps anchor our own identity, doesn't it? Not in the shifting sands of external validation, but on the solid rock of God's unchanging nature. That fosters security and genuine humility.
And it cultivates a spirit of genuine, heartfelt worship, moving beyond just performing religious duties to authentic expressions of gratitude, adoration, and awe.
And it inspires transformation within our communities, right?
Yeah.
As acts of kindness, justice, compassion become the natural outflow of our shared acknowledgement of God's profound intrinsic worth.
Precisely. It's about consciously aligning our entire lives to reflect that constant, unchanging radiance of divine glory that originates within God himself.
Okay, now let's flip the coin and talk about the dangers of misplaced glory. What are the common pitfalls when we start looking for validation and worth from sources other than God?
Yeah, the sources wisely point out that the human heart just has this persistent tendency to wander, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Looking for recognition, for affirmation, often chasing things that are ultimately temporary, fleeting, and really detract from pursuing God's true eternal glory. It fundamentally boils down to seeking our deepest worth in the finite instead of the infinite.
So we're basically contrasting that enduring intrinsic glory of God with this misplaced focus on things that are inherently temporary and just can't satisfy us long term.
Exactly. And the whole concept of idolatry is a prime example of this. When we consciously or unconsciously give ultimate worth, loyalty, devotion to anything other than God, whether it's money, power, success, even ideas.
Worshipping finite, maybe even distorted shadows instead of the true enduring substance.
Yes. And as humans, we naturally gravitate towards what we can see and touch and measure, right? But those things, by themselves, can never truly satisfy the deepest longings of the human heart. And then there's that ever-present temptation of seeking human praise.
The subtle but powerful trap of external validation, where our sense of self-worth gets dangerously tied to the fickle opinions and fleeting approval of others.
Precisely. Human praise, while it might feel good for a moment, is ultimately temporary, like a flickering candle, not that constant, enduring radiance of intrinsic worth. And in chasing it relentlessly, we can subtly start to worship our own image, prioritizing what others think above God's glory.
So what are some of the negative consequences when we fall into these patterns of misplaced glory?
The sources poignantly describe a life characterized by this perpetual seeking. This endless, frustrating loop of always wanting more, getting a temporary fix, and then immediately feeling that need for the next thing, never really feeling fulfilled or at peace. And deeper down, it leads to this significant erosion of our authentic identity. We drift further and further from who we were created to be in God's image.
Sounds like a path that ultimately leads to a profound sense of emptiness, really.
It is. So what's the antidote? How do we consciously shift our focus, shift our hearts towards pursuing true and lasting glory?
It requires a deliberate, transformative shift in perspective, doesn't it? Consciously reorienting our hearts and minds towards the eternal, unchanging glory of God, ultimately finding our deepest fulfillment and identity by anchoring ourselves in Him.
Yes, it's a conscious, ongoing call to sincere, authentic worship, truly acknowledging His inherent supreme worth, and living our lives with purpose and integrity, allowing our actions to reflect His glorious nature. It's about intentionally cultivating those spiritual practices, prayer, engaging with Scripture, selfless service that consistently reinforce our true identity in God.
Moving our focus away from the fleeting towards the eternal.
Exactly. And that actually leads us to consider the incredibly diverse ways different cultures around the world have expressed and still express this fundamental human desire to worship and recognize divine glory.
It's truly fascinating to explore the sheer variety of ways communities across the globe express worship. Each one reveals a unique, beautiful response to the divine, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. And while the specific forms might vary dramatically, that fundamental universal call to recognize, honor, and declare God's inherent worthiness, that remains a constant thread. Take, for example, the vibrant, energetic traditions of African praise and dance.
Yeah, it's such a full-bodied expression of faith, embodying both profound joy and deep reverence through powerful music, rhythmic movement, communal celebration.
Yes, that deeply rhythmic expression, often using drums, chants, symbolic movements, powerfully reflects that sense of Kabod, that weighty presence and power of God. And it's so inherently communal, isn't it? A shared, unifying testimony of faith and identity.
A truly holistic, embodied way of engaging with God. What about the ancient tradition of Eastern Orthodox iconography? That feels very different.
It is quite distinct, yeah. The sacred icons aren't seen as just decorations. They're considered genuine windows into the divine. Carefully crafted images meant to invite deep contemplation and prayer. They're imbued with rich symbolism that draws the viewer's heart towards God's holiness. It's an act of veneration, a powerful visual reminder meant to focus the heart and mind on the sacred.
Beauty and a deep sense of reverence all woven together. And then there's the more structured approach often found in Western liturgical traditions.
Right, characterized by its emphasis on order, reverence, and communal participation, often using structured prayers, traditional hymns, sacraments. This approach tries to create an atmosphere of both humility before God and profound awe at His majesty. It's often experienced as a collective journey towards spiritual growth and redemption.
Discipline and a sense of formality, creating that atmosphere of solemnity and shared devotion. It really highlights just how incredibly varied worship expressions can be.
Absolutely. And beyond these specific examples, you see music and dance acting as almost universal languages of devotion. Art and architecture stand as enduring visual testimonies of faith. And there's a rich tapestry of rituals, ceremonies, oral traditions, all working to keep sacred stories alive and connect communities with the divine.
It's a truly rich and diverse tapestry of human experience.
It is. But when you look past the outward forms, what would you say is the underlying element that really unites all these diverse expressions of worship?
It seems to boil down to the genuine intention of the worshiper, doesn't it? That sincere, heartfelt desire to recognize, honor, and celebrate God's glory, regardless of the specific cultural forms or practices used.
Exactly. Authenticity in worship, that genuine outpouring of the heart, is what truly matters. And appreciating this incredible cultural richness not only broadens our understanding, but also lets us see the many diverse, beautiful ways humanity connects with the divine.
It really underscores that idea that God's glory is so expansive, it can be reflected in countless beautiful and unique ways.
It does. Now, having explored all these different facets of God's glory, how do we bring it all together and truly live a life that consistently declares His worth? What does that practical alignment look like in our everyday lives?
It feels like it's about intentionally aligning our thoughts, our actions, even our deepest desires with the very character and will of God.
Precisely. First, by consciously acknowledging his ultimate sovereignty in our lives, embracing the reality of his divine authority, and trying to see our own lives and circumstances within the context of his bigger plan.
Actively submitting our own plans and desires to him in prayer, seeking his guidance.
Second, by diligently obeying his commands, striving to live a life consistently aligned with his revealed will, demonstrating integrity and strong ethics in every part of our professional and personal lives.
Seeing obedience not as a burden, but as an act of genuine worship. Yeah.
Third, by actively reflecting his own character in our interactions with others, intentionally embodying those core attributes, love, justice, mercy in all that we do.
Letting those fruits of the Spirit really shine through in our daily encounters.
Fourth, by consistently giving thanks and offering heartfelt praise, actively cultivating a heart of gratitude that not only honors God, but also fundamentally shifts our own perspective on life.
Making that attitude of thankfulness a constant defining part of our lives.
Fifth, by boldly and lovingly sharing his good news with those around us, proclaiming the message of salvation through our own personal stories, and offering the hope found in Christ to a world that desperately needs it.
Intentionally looking for opportunities to invite others into that same experience of grace.
And finally, by purposefully using the unique gifts and talents we've each been given, actively serving others with those abilities, and recognizing that our skills can be powerful tools for advancing God's kingdom and uplifting our communities.
Seeing our talents not just as our own, but as resources to be stewarded for a greater purpose. It sounds like a very intentional, holistic way of living.
It is. It's about actively, consciously pursuing a life that glorifies God, recognizing his inherent worth, acknowledging his constant radiant presence in the world, and striving to live in ways that consistently declare his supreme value in every facet of our existence.
So what are some concrete, practical pathways we can take to more actively glorify God in our daily lives? What are some actionable steps?
Okay, simple things. Start by prioritizing daily devotion, consistent time in prayer, engaging with Scripture, actively participate in community worship and fellowship, intentionally serve others using your specific gifts, practice unwavering integrity in your actions and decisions, and look for meaningful opportunities to share the good news of God's love.
Concrete steps that make this big goal feel much more accessible, more actionable in our everyday lives.
Exactly. And when we collectively commit to actively glorifying God in these ways, what kind of broader impact can we expect to see?
Well, it feels like it would lead to profound personal transformation, right? A deeper sense of purpose, real liberation. It would positively impact our immediate communities, making them beacons of hope, fostering real systemic change. And ultimately, it could contribute to a global ripple effect, furthering God's enduring impact in the world.
Precisely. It's a journey of transformation that reshapes not only ourselves, but also the world around us for the better.
So ultimately, living a life in glory is this ongoing, daily, very intentional journey, reflecting God's inherent worth in every single moment, consciously recognizing his constant presence, even in the mundane stuff, and striving to mirror his own character in our thoughts, words, and actions.
Yes, it's about consciously embracing the everyday as sacred ground, actively finding the divine even in the ordinary moments, allowing our lives to carry the profound weight of his truth and light into the world. And is a life consistently fueled by deep gratitude and heartfelt praise, a constant recognition of his supreme, unwavering value.
And that has a powerful ripple effect, doesn't it? Transforming not just our individual lives, but also our families, our communities, and ultimately the wider world around us.
Exactly. It's about wholeheartedly embracing our divine calling, that higher, deeply fulfilling purpose of reflecting God's unchanging, magnificent glory in all that we are and all that we do.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, we've really unpacked how God's glory is so much more than just surface-level praise. It's this multifaceted reality, both intrinsic and revealed, carrying that profound weight, Kabod, and radiating with brilliant light, Doxa. And ultimately, it's something meant to be reflected in every single part of your life.
Yeah, and what's really significant to consider now is how these insights, these deeper understandings of Kabod and Doxa, can genuinely shift your own perspective on what you consider true success, what your ultimate purpose really is, and even the seemingly small, everyday choices you make.
And here's maybe a final thought for you to wrestle with. How might actively, intentionally pursuing the reflection of God's glory in your daily life lead to a far more profound, more lasting sense of true fulfillment and deep joy than the often fleeting praise and shallow validation the world so readily offers? It's a question to really explore, maybe in your own heart and reflections.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. We really encourage you to keep exploring these powerful ideas in your own life, and feel free to share any further insights or questions that come up as you do.